He was dragged from a drain pipe, tortured, sodomized with a bayonet, stripped to the waist, made to suffer from an apparent gunshot wound to the head without pity, while in a pool of his own blood. That was the last hours of Muammar Gaddafi in the hands of his Western-enabled rebel captors after his fleeing convoy was hit by drones reported to have been provided by the West. Later, when his captors were certain of his death, his lifeless body was used as an object to pose for photographs as they yank his limp head up and down by the hair. Something that the West would have seriously frowned at if it were to happen to even an ordinary citizen of theirs. Not to talk of a head of state, Gaddafi's assassination and inhumane treatment were widely celebrated and broadcasted.
This is a Libya that for the first time in 42 years does not have to live in fear of Muammar Gaddafi. He is gone for good, and few, if any, are mourning his passing.
Today we can definitively say that the Gaddafi regime has come to an end.
The world is a better place with Gaddafi gone.
But more than a decade after, Libyans and the entire African continent are now more sure than ever of the reasons why the West wanted him gone by every means possible, even if it required disgracing him alive and in death. And their reasons are the same today as yesterday. Africa must not be united. Africa must never be free.
One man was heard saying before Gaddafi was dragged off the hood towards an ambulance that Gaddafi died in the ambulance. Abdul Jalil Abdelaziz, a doctor who accompanied the body in the ambulance during the 120-mile drive to Misrata, said Gaddafi died from bullet wounds.
1:45 in the afternoon in Cairo, Egypt. Live continuing coverage here on Al Jazeera of a day of mass protest. They called it a day of rage. It is fast turning into that.
Unbelievable pictures you're seeing there of crowds of protesters trying to dump the vehicle that is a personnel carrier that carries troops of the police. They're trying almost to knock it over the
into
side
the river.
of the bridge into the Nile. Yes, into the Nile. You can see more tear gas being fired at the protesters, and more of them are coming our way.
Take your
Just
time.
1 second, stay with us, come on.
Live on CNN. Why are you here today?
I'm here because look at what's happening. Young Kenyans are demonstrating for their rights. They're demonstrating with flags and banners. I can't even see anymore. They're being tear gassed. They're being
We shall not be intimidated. This is our nation. We know how to repeat this nation.
In this video, we review how the West conspired individually and collectively to pauperize the continent and prevent every effort and attempt at having a united Africa. While we are at it, support our work by kindly hitting the thumb button. Share with friends and families to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative. And subscribe to stay with us for more interesting, revealing videos. Let us delve in. After the fall of Tripoli to forces of the opposition National Transitional Council, NTC, in August 2011, Gaddafi and his family escaped the Libyan capital. Early in the morning of October 20th, 2011, Gaddafi, his army chief Abu Bakr Yunus Jabr, his security chief Mansour Dao, and a group of loyalists tried to escape in a convoy of 75 vehicles. A Royal Air Force Panavia Tornado, during a reconnaissance mission, spotted the convoy moving fast after NATO forces intercepted a satellite phone call made by Gaddafi. NATO aircraft then fired on 21 of the vehicles, destroying one. An American Predator drone controlled from a base near Las Vegas fired the first missiles at the convoy, hitting its target about 3 kilometers west of Sirte. A moment later, French Air Force Mirage 2000D fighter jets continued the bombing. The NATO bombing immobilized much of the convoy and killed dozens of loyalist fighters. After the first strike, the convoy split into several groups, with a subsequent strike destroying 11 vehicles. Rebel units on the ground also struck the convoy. Several videos related to the death were shown on television and circulated on the internet.
It had begun hours earlier, around 8 a.m. Thursday in Sirte, Gaddafi's hometown, when rebels started what they hoped would be the last offensive against the last Gaddafi holdouts. Then an American drone operated from Las Vegas alerts NATO. It spots a convoy of 80 cars fleeing south from Sirte. French fighter jets respond with an airstrike, taking out 2 of the vehicles. It's still unclear if they hit Gaddafi's car, but when rebels pour in, they tell the BBC's Gabriel Gatehouse he was hiding in this drainage pipe.
They say they discovered him here just before 12 o'clock this afternoon. They pulled him out of the hole, and one fighter told me that Muammar Gaddafi said to him, "What did I do to you?"
We kitchen in there, and we shot him.
The fatal shot reportedly fired by this man, proudly brandishing Gaddafi's gold gun. Rebels reportedly propped Gaddafi on the hood of a car for minutes, apparently parading their prize through the streets. "We want him alive, we want him alive," one man was heard saying before Gaddafi was dragged off the hood towards an ambulance. But Gaddafi died in the ambulance.
U.S. military officials are telling us, in fact, that it was a U.S. military Predator drone that fired a Hellfire missile directly at Muammar Gaddafi's 15-vehicle convoy. In addition, one NATO warplane also fired a rocket at that missile at that very convoy. Now, according to the officials, several of the vehicles were either struck or disabled. The rest of them scattered. Now, it appears that Muammar Gaddafi was obviously in or near one of the vehicles that was struck, and it appears that what he did was make his way to a nearby drainage pipe alongside the highway where his rebel captors eventually found him, took him into custody, and that video where we actually see him alive and in custody of those rebel forces before he apparently died somehow in an ambulance on his way from Sirte to Misrata. Now, what's interesting about this, as you know, Martin, those Predator drones are not just there to fire missiles, but their primary mission is surveillance. So it's very likely, given the kind of intense fighting over Sirte and U.S. intelligence that said Muammar Gaddafi is in Sirte, that Predator drone was hovering over Sirte when Muammar Gaddafi made his way into that convoy and out of Sirte. So it is more likely than not that the U.S. military already knew that Muammar Gaddafi was in that convoy when they fired upon it, which of course raises the question about U.S. claims that they were not out to actually kill Muammar Gaddafi. Indeed. In this case, it appears they were.
And the West gloated. Even the then President of the United States, Barack Obama, was in the forefront. Incidentally, 2011 was not the first assassination attempt on Gaddafi by the West and its European allies. On 15th April 1986, the United States Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps carried out airstrikes, code-named Operation El Dorado Canyon, against Libya in retaliation for the West Berlin discotheque bombing 10 days earlier, for which the then U.S. President Ronald Reagan blamed the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. Did you notice that? 10 days earlier. Makes room for suspicion, as was expressed in many quarters. On the Libyan side, there were 45 soldiers and officials as casualties, 15 to 30 Libyan civilians killed. 1 U.S. plane was shot down and 2 aircrew killed, though Libya claimed 3. One of the claimed Libyan deaths was of a baby girl, reported to be Gaddafi's daughter, Hana Gaddafi. However, there are doubts as to whether she was really killed or whether she truly existed. Even though Gaddafi was the target of the attack and was in the compound during the attack, he was able to survive. From North Africa to South, East to West, and Central, Africa has not been known to enjoy relative peace for a long period at a time. Ever since the conquest and slave trade era, with the eventual European countries meeting at the infamous Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 to partition and share Africa among themselves, it has been from one internal and inter-border crisis to another in Africa, mostly with the hidden hands of Europe and America, and in recent times, Russia and China. The Berlin Conference, which many have classified as the worst act of injustice and human rights violations, gathered a bunch of Europeans to plot ways to divide up Africa, may not have been the start of colonialism, or conquest as many have chosen to refer to it, but it sure accelerated the process. The conference was set out to achieve 3 objectives and consequences. First was to recognize the territory that King Leopold II claimed as his private property. Isn't that intriguing? Claiming what is today known as a country with indigenous people and landowners as someone else's private property? How funny. The second objective was to recognize some existing territorial claims in different parts of Africa. While the third and most important result of the conference was to set up a way for Europeans to claim and annex whatever territory was yet unaccounted for in Africa within the first and second objectives. In a pictorial illustration of the conference, all of the elements were there. It was a conference about Africa, but happening in a room in Berlin, Germany, with 0 Africans, and only 2 of the attendees had ever stepped foot on the continent, a continent which is about 3 times larger than Europe. Instead, it was a bunch of European men, representing 12 countries in Europe, plus an American representative and one from the Ottoman Empire. The room was dominated by a gigantic map of Africa. Why? Because the job the men at the conference had taken upon themselves was to divide up Africa between their respective countries. Before the Berlin Conference and then afterwards, the gruesomeness and cruelty have always been unimaginably out of this world to Africa, which they still see as personal and national conquests. But most especially in the 21st century, the sense of ownership has been more brazenly disastrous. So much so that anybody or any nation who dared to push for the idea of a united Africa must be taught a lesson. More than once, a fatal lesson. From the gruesome assassination of the likes of former Libyan ruler Muammar Gaddafi and others who have ever dared to vigorously push for the unification of Africa, to proliferation of arms and ammunitions, funding and equipping of insurrections and rebellions, coups and counter-coups, harboring dissidents and enemies of states, using international media and propagandas to misinform, disinform, instigate, and amplify crisis. The list goes on, and perhaps the worst of it all, impoverishing the continent directly and indirectly, and while claiming to help, use financial and economic means through Western institutions such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Funds, IMF, to insist on policies known to set Africans, nations, and governments against one another, the likes of which we recently witnessed in Ghana, Nigeria, and the smoldering one in Kenya. All these were what the late Libyan ruler wanted changed with a united African entity called African Authority. But the West knew the implications. Who lets a cash cow free? Gaddafi must have sealed his fate at the end of the 2010 African Union, AU, summit in Kampala, Uganda, where the Libyan leader said that his dream of a United States of Africa was still alive, and the week's African Union summit was another step toward that objective. Gaddafi has been pushing for an African unity government for years, saying it is the only way Africa can develop without Western interference. But many African states said that the idea was impractical and would encroach on their sovereignty. However, the West was apprehensive and jittery, especially because the push was coming from a North African state, and no less a person as Gaddafi. The prospect of a united Africa was becoming apparent, so much so that Gaddafi was reported to have mined tons of gold to securitize the eventual African uniform currency. At that stage, and with intelligence they had gathered, the West did not doubt one bit that he would not be able to pull it through. Remember that he had been able to secure goodwill of some African countries through millions of dollars in aid, while the heavyweights such as Nigeria and Ghana are traditional believers in the ideology. It was therefore a matter of defining technicalities and modalities over the next few summits, and the African Authority would have been realized. Hence, the ultimate solution to truncate the momentum was to take out the arrowhead. But first, there's always the need for propaganda and the engineering of insurrections as cover-up, as it was the case of those before him. The likes of Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah, who was overthrown in a coup with the help from the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, while Patrice Lumumba, the first Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, President of Burkina Faso Thomas Sankara, Sylvanus Epifanio Olympio, the first President of Togo, and many others were assassinated for their anti-imperialist stance and efforts to promote Africa's self-sufficiency. At that point in the history of Libya, the country and citizens were the envy of the world, with the citizens enjoying better social welfare packages than many in Europe and America. Some of which are: number 1, Libya has no electricity bill. Electricity came free of charge to all citizens. Number 2, there were no interest rates on loans. The banks were state-owned. The loan of citizens by law, 0%. Number 3, Gaddafi promised not to buy a house for his parents until everyone in Libya owns a home. Number 4, all newlywed couples in Libya received 60,000 dinars from the government, and because of that, they bought their own apartments and started their families. Number 5, education and medical treatment in Libya are free. Before Gaddafi, there were only 25% readers, 83% during his reign. Number 6, if Libyans wanted to live on a farm, they received free household appliances, seeds, and livestock. Number 7, if they cannot receive treatment in Libya, the state would fund them with $2,300+ accommodation and travel for treatment abroad. Number 8, if you buy a car, the government finances 50% of the price. Number 9, the price of gasoline became $0.14 per liter. Number 10, Libya had no external debt, and reserves were $150 billion, now frozen worldwide. Number 11, since some Libyans can't find jobs after school, the government will pay the average salary when they can't find a job. Number 12, part of oil sales in Libya are directly linked to the bank accounts of all citizens. Number 13, the mother who gave birth to the child will receive $5,000. Number 14, 40 loaves of bread cost $0.15. Number 15, 25% of Libyans had all ILISNA diplomas. Number 16, Gaddafi has implemented the world's biggest irrigation project known as the Big Man Project to ensure water availability in the desert. In spite of all these and more, the West demonized Gaddafi, calling him a dictator. Like many commentators have asked afterwards that if these were called dictatorship, they wonder what democracy was. The West sold dummies to the Libyans, and they are today regretting their actions. Today, Libya is split between rival governments ruling different parts of the oil-rich country. Insurgent group ISIS, until recently, had seized parts of Sirte, only driven out by a government fightback.
We are in a period that is much worse than the last, and Libya is threatened with extinction,
said one resident.
After the previous regime fell, we hoped that with the will of God, things would be better because we expect a lot from our country. We hope that those who love their country will unite for reconciliation, to create national reconciliation. It's the only way for the country to be built, God willing,
said another resident. Presently, the situation in Libya is so deplorable, especially security-wise, that at the time of production of this video, home offices of many countries still warn their citizens from traveling there. Like the following from the Australian: we continue to advise, do not travel to Libya due to the dangerous security situation and the high threat of terrorism and kidnapping. If you're in Libya, and it's safe to do so, leave as soon as possible. Due to the ongoing unrest, our ability to provide consular assistance to Australians in Libya is severely limited. There are similar concerns and warnings for safety, health, and local laws. Violent fighting is widespread and ongoing in Libya. The security situation is very unstable. There's a high threat of terrorist attack, kidnapping, and crime. Don't travel to Libya. If you stay in Libya, despite our advice, seek professional security advice. Monitor the media for possible risks. Waterborne, foodborne, parasitic, and other infectious diseases are common. They include typhoid, hepatitis, tuberculosis, plague, and measles. Only drink boiled or bottled water. Don't swim in fresh water. Medical facilities in Libya are limited. Some medicines are in short supply. If you're seriously ill or injured, you may need to be evacuated. Make sure of your insurance. The rule of law has not been re-established in Libya. Police services may not operate in all areas. Officials may seize your passport if you're involved in a business dispute. They may not let you leave Libya until the dispute is settled, and many more.
Libya, that was literally a paradise in the desert, has been turned into hell.
A longtime immigrant blotted. Back to events unfolding from the 2010 African Union Summit. Like previous African summits, the week's gathering in the Ugandan capital, Kampala, discussed steps toward creating an African government. But the issue was overshadowed by chaos in Somalia and an international arrest warrant for Sudan's president. While addressing a small group of reporters in Kampala at the end of the summit, Gaddafi said, and I quote,
"I am satisfied that Africa is going along its historic and right road."
He went further.
"One day it will become similar to the United States of America. We are approaching the formation of the African Authority, and each time we solve African problems, and also move in the direction of peace and unity. We deal with problems step by step. We are continuing to do that."
The creation of the African Authority must not see the light of the day. The West realized that they could not shrug away Gaddafi's attempts at uniting Africa. The same way it slipped by them when the then Organization of African Unity, OAU, morphed into African Unity with the first move made in Sirte, a major city in same Gaddafi's Libya. Same Sirte he was eventually murdered in. Watching the turn of events as pushed by Gaddafi, power brokers from Western countries and Europe must have realized that Gaddafi's united Africa was going beyond a joke. That they could not afford the mistake of watching OAU transforming to AU to repeat itself. That the formation of a united African body would spell doom for their hold on the continent they have held by the jugular for centuries. It was at that point that Gaddafi's fate not to push his agenda further must have been sealed as the West made sure that he was assassinated just about a year later. And a few months after the 2011 AU summit, Gaddafi held the African Union's rotating chairmanship the previous year, 2009, and he used it to push for the organization's small executive body to be granted enhanced powers and remodeled as the African Authority. Asked about that proposal during the summit, Gaddafi said,
"Studies are still continuing, and it is not finished yet. Experts and the people responsible are still studying the documents. They might be completed at the next summit or after."
Some African leaders say they cannot be expected to cede sovereignty to any African bloc just decades after they wrested it away from their colonial rulers. The next summit or after? Fear must have gone down the spines of the Western and European powers. Fears which were made more real because Gaddafi's idea has had a sympathetic response in some states, helped by his reputation in parts of the continent as a champion of the developed world, and also by the millions of dollars in aid his oil-exporting country spends in Africa. As if Gaddafi was oblivious of the dangers his push for a united Africa held and was creating for him, his push at the 2011 summit was equally strong. But perhaps his most daring attempt was in the week leading to the 2007 African Union Summit, held in Accra, Ghana. Speaking at a rally at the University of Ghana on the eve of the summit, Gaddafi said AU leaders had not yet achieved the dream of unity voiced half a century ago by Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah, founding father of African independence. And that for Africa, it was a matter of to be or not to be. Accra was the last stop in a week-long road trip by Gaddafi to the summit via the West African capitals of Bamako, Conakry, Freetown, and Abidjan. At each stop, he held rallies calling for the establishment of a government of the United States of Africa.
"Africa needed one voice and one army,"
Gaddafi said.
"How can an African country face a Europe that is united, negotiate with a big USA or Japan or China.
He said.
If we have a United States of Africa, then Africa can be on an equal footing and negotiate with them. Uniting the continent would also staunch the flow of migrants to Europe.
Gaddafi said. Obviously, the West would not want any of these achieved. Through the 1990s, leaders debated the need to amend the OAU's structures to reflect the challenges of a changing world. In 1999, the OAU heads of state and government issued the Sirte Declaration, calling for the establishment of a new African Union. The vision for the Union was to build on the OAU's work by establishing a body that could accelerate the process of integration in Africa, support the empowerment of African states in the global economy, and address the multifaceted social, economic, and political problems facing the continent. In total, 4 summits were held in the lead-up to the official launching of the African Union. Sirte Summit, 1999, which adopted the Sirte Declaration calling for the establishment of the AU. Lomé Summit, 2000, which adopted the AU Constitutive Act. Lusaka Summit, 2001, which drew the roadmap for implementation of the AU. Durban Summit, 2002, which launched the AU and convened its first assembly of heads of state and government. A significant number of OAU structures were carried forward into the AU. Similarly, many of the OAU's core commitments, decisions, and strategy frameworks continue to frame AU policies. However, while the footprint of the OAU is still strong, the AU Constitutive Act and protocols established a significant number of new structures, both at the level of major organs and through a range of new technical and subsidiary committees. Many of these have evolved since 2002, and some are still under development. With the death scare circling the head of everyone and anyone who pushed for a free and united Africa, does it mean that the dream has been killed? Especially with the last and boldest attempts in the struggle being Gaddafi. With the turn of fortune and calamity that have befallen Libya, would any African leader or head of state dare to champion the cause of a free and united Africa, thereby putting his or her country in the crossfire? The idea of a United States of Africa, or a more united Africa in general, has been a topic of discussion for many years, and perspectives on this concept vary widely. It's important to note that the reasons for resistance or skepticism towards the idea of a United States of Africa are complex and multifaceted, and there isn't a single unified Western perspective on this issue. However, some potential reasons that have been discussed in the past include: Number 1. Historical context. Historically, Western powers have had a long history of involvement in Africa, including colonization and exploitation of the continent's resources. Some critics argue that a united and strong Africa could potentially challenge the economic and political interests of certain Western countries or multinational corporations operating in the region. Number 2. Political and economic interests. Some observers suggest that a more united Africa could present a challenge to the existing global power structures, potentially shifting the balance of power in international relations. This could lead to concerns about the impact on trade relationships, access to resources, and geopolitical influence. Number 3. Concerns about stability and governance. Africa is a diverse continent with many different cultures, languages, and political systems. Some skeptics of the United States of Africa concept worry about the practical challenges of uniting such a diverse region under a single political entity. There are concerns about governance, stability, and the potential for internal conflicts within a united African state. Number 4. Sovereignty and self-determination. Some critics argue that advocating for a United States of Africa could be seen as imposing a specific vision of unity on African nations, potentially infringing on their sovereignty and right to self-determination. There are concerns that a top-down approach to unity could overlook the diverse needs and aspirations of individual African countries. It's important to recognize that these are just some of the factors that have been discussed in relation to the idea of a United States of Africa. And opinions on this topic may vary widely within both Western and African contexts. Ultimately, the question of whether a united Africa is desirable or feasible is a complex issue that involves considerations of history, politics, economics, culture, and governance. While many observers have excused the West for the inability of Africa to unite, blaming rather Africa and Africans themselves because of their lack of homogeneity, supremacy competition, and power struggles, many on the other divide believe that Africans would have found ways to resolve most of their divisions if not for the superior influences based on exploitative interests of the West. After all, is Europe homogeneous, nor America? The colonialists care nothing for Africa for her own sake. They are attracted by African riches, and their actions are guided by the desire to preserve their interests in Africa against the wishes of the African people. For the colonialists, all means are good if it helps them to possess these riches. Those are the words of Patrice Lumumba, first Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Also citing instances where the West and Europe have been implicated in disastrous endings of Africans who have championed the cause. But first, let's put the topic in perspective. Given the size, population, distribution of tribes, and balkanization of Africa, no thanks to the same West, having a united Africa in comparison to the United States of America is practically impossible. But taking a cue from a recent statement from Aliko Dangote, the Nigerian business mogul and richest man in Africa, the continent may be heading for a hybrid version.
Finally, really quickly, we talk a lot about the African Continental Free Trade Area, the ability for goods and services to move across the continent. Mr. Dangote, you have previously complained about the difficulty of traveling on a Nigerian passport across the continent. Has it become easier?
Even an hour ago, I complained to President Kagame.
At least you can come here visa-free.
No, here is a best example, but I told him that, yes, as an investor, as somebody who really wants to make Africa great, I have to now apply 35 different visas on my passport. And I told Mr. President, I said, Mr. President, I really don't have the time to go and be dropping my passports in embassies to get a visa. But you see, the most annoying thing is that, yes, if you are treating everybody the same, then I can understand. You know, I can assure you, Patrick doesn't need 35 visas. No, I said that, what I'm saying, you have...
You do not... You don't need 35 visas on a French passport compared to a Nigerian passport.
35 visas on French passport.
No.
But, you know, so which means you have a freer movement than myself.
Dangote has to have 35 visas to travel around the continent, while foreigners have freer movement within Africa. Similarly, citizens of Francophone countries in Africa have better ease of movement within their co-Francophones. Flying from Kenya to Namibia is the same price as flying to Thailand. Imagine the nightmare that people face when traveling around a continent that has more borders than any other continent on Earth. 166. Such difficulties make it hard for African entrepreneurs to establish businesses outside their countries. With the enactment of an African passport in the near future, people can have access to new investment opportunities outside their countries. Furthermore, African countries usually don't get fair deals when trading with countries outside the continent, due to the fact that they have a lower negotiating power. This is what happens to countries that aren't positioned well economically or politically. With a free flow of trade, the continent can create the largest trading bloc in the world. Perhaps even more, the largest ever seen. This can come with an adoption of a single currency and the ditching of the CFA franc in former French colonies. Something similar to the ideology target of Gaddafi. The idea on ease of trade within the continent has been put into practice, in part, through the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, ACFTA. It allows for the free movement of people, goods, and services within Africa. Goods with more than 60% value addition at an African origin are subject to no tariffs within the continent. 44 countries out of the 54 members of the African Union signed the agreement in 2018. It kicked in when 22 countries ratified it with local law. Efforts should be intensified to have more members join the ACFTA, and maybe to improve on the value content. The most challenging would be the visa restrictions and single currency, something similar to the euros. But as they say, Rome was not built in a day. Maybe within the next decade, the continent would be more united and freer from the hold of the West, thereby bringing the dreams of many who had died in the struggle to fruition. Let's hope that we live to witness the day. That brings us to the end of yet another video segment. Did you happen to learn a thing or two from this one? Reach out to us in the comment section below to share your thoughts. We are always delighted to pick from them. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay tuned in. Thank you for watching.